And we have a very stacked show for you this week, but we're going to start out with our very first guest. Our show's theme today will be surrounded around student literacy and other issues surrounding the education system as a whole. And right now I'm joined by our very own professor from the English department, Professor William Prystauk, and he's known colloquially as Bill. So I took his classes. It's good to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephen. It's great for being here.
We appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to come join us.
This is a pleasure.
It is, and pleasure for me. Now, we're going to talk about a few things today. You have published a few things on KU Converge, which is a journal of faculty collaboration for learning technologies, and you published two that I have read and I agree with, and one of them is called When Students Hate to Read Course Materials, and this is something we talked about before. I took your Writing for the Workplace class.
Yes, you did.
And it applied to me like, wow, I saw the same thing, and students sometimes will not read the directions. And when did you first realize this trend of students that don't like to read?
It actually came about when I was teaching the Writing in the Workplace course in a traditional classroom setting, and then I was asked to teach it online. And I noticed that the online students were not performing well at all. And I was like, okay, why? It's the same material. It's the material that they can access all the time. The students don't have to take notes. And I've taken both traditional classes myself and online, and I didn't see an issue. And then I realized that students weren't actually reading the material. A lot of them were looking at samples that I had, and they were like, well, I'm just going to follow the sample, which is bad because I purposely choose samples that aren't perfect.
I took your classes. I took two of them.
So people, you wouldn't want to copy these things. And that's what I noticed. And it took a while, and I started to apply, almost a disclaimer to the course, being, you might think this is easier because you don't have to get up at 8 a.m. to go to this class. It's online. But if you don't read the course material, it could spell doomsday for you. So
right, I don't understand why some students would try and, like you said, circumvent your words because there's no class time. So if you want to learn about how the assignment is, you read the directions. That's your class time. And for some reason, I'm thinking this is the only way I'm going to be able to pass this class, And there's not office hours. Of course, I can email them, but that's the best way to learn the material and what is expected of you. And you mentioned, that sometimes they look at the example and use it as a template. And I think example and template are two separate words. And you called it content plagiarism. I was looking for something like that.
Yes.
When did you first notice that students were really starting to rely heavily on that only?
It was amazing. It happened during one class where I started reading one of the student responses, and then I read another one, and they were all beginning the same way. They weren't copying from each other. I went right to the source. I went right back to my own material, and I was like, they're just taking the existing sample, plugging in some of their own words, and I was like, stop. You can't do this.
It's unprofessional.
Well, it's not just unprofessional. If everybody did this, then there would be nothing new ever because we would just be copying and pasting for eternity.
Yeah.
I think what a lot of students fail to realize is they're not children. This is adult time. You're in a university. This is the beginning of your career. The moment you step into this institution, it doesn't begin once you leave. It begins here and now. You are an adult. You're coming to a classroom. You need to bring your own ideas, your own. We'll get to confidence in a second, but students need to bring their own ideas and exchange those with the professors. We're not here, this isn't grade school where we're here to say things and have students regurgitate. We want to know what students are bringing to the table as well, so to speak, not to use the cliche, and deliver something new and different and blow our minds as well.
Right, that's the beauty of writing. My dad calls writing painting a picture with words. And
absolutely correct.
If you're taking someone else's stuff and taking the colors from that, that's not new. That's where does creativity goes out the window. Right. And that's just, I'm sure, I'm a young writer. I've made my share of mistakes, and I'm sure others. As an English professor with the experience you have, what's the most common mistake you see that young writers make?
They don't proofread.
Read them out loud?
They read them out loud. If nothing works better. What I see is students taking a first draft is the final draft, and that's the biggest mistake you can make. As a professional writer, I can't even do that. In marketing, sometimes when we had deadlines, we had no choice. That's a whole different animal. But in this environment, you're given ample time to make sure that you take your time to write several drafts. So you could bring because the work that you hand in, any paper, is representative of you as a person. So you don't want to hand in garbage, because then you're telling your professor, hey, I'm garbage. You don't want to do that.
I agree. And why do you think students are so prone to taking shortcuts and saying, no, I got the assignment, I'll just hand it in? Why do you see that sometimes?
I think it's multiple factors. I think a lot of it has to do with our own culture. We have a culture where no one has any time to do anything anymore. And even if instructors give students ample time, when you take into account, well, I have to work, I have family issues and everything else, I think that adds up. And I think some students want to just cut a corner if they can, just to make life maybe easier for themselves. Plus, I also think we have a situation in this country where instead of instilling a thirst for knowledge into the minds of our young people, we're instilling a thirst for cash. And what I think a lot of people don't realize, a lot of students, is you can major in anything you want. There's tons of fantastic majors here. I changed my major 7 times when I was in college.
You told us this.
And I know I told you that. And there was a reason for it. Every time I took a class, I fell in love with it. I learned new things, and I wanted to know more. And I majored in, I earned my bachelor's in history originally. But I could have also earned that in anthropology, in archaeology, geology, and the list went on. And I could have made money in all of those fields. The thing is, you have to, whatever you want to do, that's fine, but make sure that you're paying attention to the other work outside of that major of yours to get there. Writing is a form of communication that is needed dramatically in the workplace. There are so many businesses that hire people like me to go in and teach their people how to write emails, even in police.
Even an email.
Yeah. Criminology.
Writing for the workplace was about it. I thought, an email? And then, no, there's actually a lot of intricacies to it. They're still going to look at that almost as it's almost like a formal document these days.
It is, exactly. The Associated Press in 2004, I remember reading this, said 1/3 of workers do not meet writing requirements. And that's,
really?
Yes. And that hasn't really changed in the 10 years since that study came out. I know a police officer who said he knows a number of officers who couldn't continue with their career choice in law enforcement because they couldn't write a decent report.
Wow.
And if you don't write a decent report, then a prosecutor can't prosecute the case.
It just throws the whole process out the window.
And this goes for anybody in any industry. When you have to write something, if you write poorly, you're misrepresenting your company that you work for.
Writing is a skill that my dad always tells me. Writing is a skill that opens probably more doors for you than a lot of other majors. Almost, I think, of any other.
Yes, your dad's fantastic because it's true. It's absolutely true.
My dad, he actually got to write a little professionally himself, and that had a bit of an effect on me. But
excellent.
Yeah, and on the side of his writers, a lot of students will struggle with writing assignments. One thing I've noticed, and it's writer's block is what a lot of people call it.
Ooh.
And that's the worst. And what do you think is the biggest barrier that students struggle to overcome as young writers?
All right. Well, I think the thing is, first of all, I don't believe in writer's block. And I don't call it writer's excuse anymore. I used to do that, and that was wrong. I think anytime that you're thinking about a story in your head or whatever you're writing, whatever assignment, if you don't know what to do, that might mean you have too many options, and that's actually a good thing.
It is.
Okay, so that's not a bad thing. What I think a lot of students should do is talk out their ideas and record it. On every smartphone, you have a record button. Record your own voice. Play it back. The one thing that I notice actually with students is their main problem is they don't understand that they know writing better than they know. I know that sounds a little bizarre, because all you have to do is hear people speak. Okay? Grammar, syntax. Okay, you can't see punctuation, but everything else is there. When you write, you use a different part of your brain, and that's where the trouble begins. So, for instance, what students could do is if you tell a story better than write one, tell the story, record it, play it back, transcribe it, then you have a rough draft. Writing is any means necessary.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of students, what they need to do is just take a breath and allow them to think of all of the things that make them who they are as a person, and that's what you're bringing to the writing every time.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The hardest thing I had whenever any assignment was just getting started. I mean, when people always say, I have to write this paper, and I've just thought, okay, but the second I start, ideas start flowing, insights accrete, and I think, okay, now I just have to get my draft, put as much information out as I can, and then rearrange it and use it as a draft. That's the hardest thing I think for any writer, anyone in a work of art, is just to get started.
Yeah, it can be, and there's so many different ways to go about it. You don't have to, like an outline doesn't work for me. I don't use outlines. I use other methods, and we all have to find out what our own methods are and just make it happen.
For sure. And going back to the, because your article is about their online experience, I forgot to mention this. You did say, you have an online class and
Right.
grades were not as good. Because of that, are you a fan of online classes? Because they are very condensed, especially writing classes.
Yeah, yes and no. It's like anything else. I don't think anything's perfect. I do love a traditional classroom because of the energy, I hope to bring to it, as well as the energy from the students. Plus, you get that camaraderie, and, you never know who you're going to meet. Online, it's a little bit difficult, but
Relationships are a little superficial. Yeah, a little.
No, but I do like them both because they both have their place. One of the reasons I chose to teach a summer course online initially was we would have to meet here 2 hours a day, Monday through Thursday. And I was just thinking of gasoline prices alone at the time. And I was like, no, let's do it online. Let's see how it works. And that was actually a good class. And then, things changed afterwards. I've been teaching online for probably 4 years now, as well as in traditional classrooms. And they both have their advantages and disadvantages. But if you're an adult learner, as you all are, and you can police yourself and meet deadlines and you have no trouble reading, then an online class would be wonderful for you. But just know if you're going into an online class, you have to do some lifting.
You'll have to use the muscle up here.
Yes, exactly.
That kind of heavy lifting. And like you said in your article, it's not heavy lifting. It's written in what I believe you said, like a 5th to 7th grade level, I believe it is.
Yes, it's what I took from marketing. You write at a 5th to 7th grade reading level, for the most part, just to keep things simple. I don't, I don't want to throw any people curveballs by throwing in some archaic words or whatever. It's simple, straightforward language. Most professors write in that sense. And one of the things that I do, I take feedback from students at the end of the semester. What worked, what didn't? Did this make sense? Is it during the semester even? Do you understand the reading material? Yeah, I get it. It makes sense. So I make any adjustments accordingly, but I haven't had to.
Right. And you said in your article when students, right here.
That's okay. I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, good. When students hate to read, you said that you use a three-pronged approach, and right in here you had 3 methods. You advise students to avoid, like you mentioned, content plagiarism.
Correct.
And then you are reminded that samples are not perfect,
right,
and definitely be improved upon, and then have them analyze it, focus on its best assets, and nitpick. And it seems like for some reason I understood it. I'm like, okay, this is what professor wants from me, and it sounds like a great approach. Why do you believe it's so hard for students to just accept that and realize that you can't, like you said, cut corners?
Well, it's funny. I think we're re-emerging as a reading culture because anytime you walk into a bookstore, you see the YA section just growing and growing, and that's more people are reading. But for a time there, and now, there's been a gap. And I think people just don't want to read, or they think it takes too much time. We live in a culture where we want things yesterday. Reading takes some time and effort. It's not like sitting down and watching a movie. A lot of people I know would rather watch a 15-minute show on a web series than a half-hour show on television, let alone like 2-hour movies. Oh man, that's too long. Why? Oh, it's 90 minutes. I'll go see that because you get that extra half hour to enjoy life, and I think a lot of people don't want to take the time.
Right, and I don't understand. There's no more clear way. If you ever have questions, sometimes your question could be answered in the very text that they have right in front of you.
That's why quite often my responses to students when they ask a question is, "Did you look at the course material?" That's because it's right there.
Yeah, I know. I've had friends like that. They say, "Oh, Steve, how do you do this?" And I say it's in the syllabus. And
yes, exactly.
It's the one thing with. And when we'll head back to the way of student writing. And what do you feel is the best way? And I'm sure you take this approach towards teaching the intricacies of writing. Not just is it clear? The smaller, more meticulous aspects of it.
Oh man, well, repetition, of course, but I guess the big key is I always stress reading. All of my best writing students have been great readers, and it's not a mistake. The more you read, the better you will write, depending on the material, of course. I mean, if you're reading 50 Shades of Grey, you're not going to be a good writer after that. But the University of Toronto, there were 2 studies last year. One was from the University of Toronto, where they discovered that literary fiction helps with grasping ambiguity. Okay?
Okay.
which is interesting. Not nonfiction, but fiction. And Scientific American and The Guardian and many others reported from the New School in New York City. They found that reading literary fiction improves empathy. But both of these also, and that's a whole other thing to keep studying, is like, well, why does fiction help with empathy and not nonfiction?
I'd like to read
That's a whole
this.
other show because I have a whole idea on that too.
We'll bring you on another interview just to talk about that.
Okay, that's fine. But it's been proven that the more you read, the better writer you will be. One semester, for instance, I had a student, an Iraq war veteran, IT specialist, and he was writing, phenomenal work. It blew my mind. And I asked him, do you read books 2 a week? It was automatic and not textbooks and that weren't assigned, but he knew. I had another student, he was a mathematics major. He came in with the Wall Street Journal rolled up under his arm every day, and that's a solid paper.
My dad and me swap articles from there all the time.
Yeah, there you go. And his writing he blew everybody away. The more you read, the better you will write. They go hand in hand.
Right. You learn, that's how you learn more words, better forms of communication, better syntax, just by reading.
Absolutely.
And
sure.
it's like, succinctly, it's like Dr. Downing of the English department says. He always says this to me: writers read, readers write. And
there you go.
I need to tattoo that on my arm or something. That's great. And going back to the
Dr. Downing would love that.
Oh, he would. Yeah, and he has a ton of mantras that we all love to use.
Oh, sure.
And we'll just end on this topic of writing. What class that you teach as an English professor do you feel is the most beneficial to students preparing for the real world as far as the writing aspect of it goes?
As far as the writing aspect, well, I still have to go back to writing for the workplace.
I was expecting that.
Yeah, you leave with a resume, a cover letter. You know how to write letters of thank you, of refusal. A lot of students discover when they're looking for internships, for example, that, oh my gosh, every semester I have at least one student. I had 5 offers or 7. What do I do? What do? You have to send refusal letters to the ones you don't want, letters of resignation, and the like. And when I was graduating with my bachelor's in history, not a million years ago, but long enough, there wasn't any help for me at the time. We didn't have a career services center that was dedicated. We didn't have a course like that to take, and I left ill-prepared. And it probably took me, and this is no lie, 5 to 7 years to find my way on my own to a full professional position because I didn't have those skills. But you'll develop them, and you'll use everything from that course in your working life.
Well, absolutely, yeah. That's one thing. If there's one class I think everyone should take, and I don't think it's a requirement of every student, is writing for the workplace. Because I'm worried about how to make a resume. Now you know how to make that. So when you apply for a job, you've got pretty much all of it written for you. You tweak it a little, but that's your ticket in. And I feel like that's really beneficial. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming on, Bill.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Steve.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you very much. Okay, and stay tuned for more KU Live.
Psst. Yeah, it's me, your heart. Listen to me. We've got to talk. High blood pressure is serious, and yours? Whoa. What happened to us? We used to be so much more active. But lately you've been ignoring me. I know you think I'm just gonna keep ticking away forever, but you're wrong. You can do so much more to control your high blood pressure. Doing the minimum isn't doing enough. I'm under a lot of pressure and can quit whenever I want. Bet you didn't know that. But I like my job. Just treat me better. Check on me. Give me something green to nibble on every once in a while. And maybe we can do some exercise on occasion. Let's get to it. After all, we're in this together.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you. High blood pressure can lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get your blood pressure to a healthy range before it's too late. Find out how at heart.org/blood pressure. Check, change, control. A message from the American Heart Association, the American Stroke Association, and the Ad Council.
KUR, the radio voice of Kutztown University. KUR Kutztown. Hey everyone, welcome back to KU Live. The time right now is about 2:22 p.m. Eastern Time. We just had a very great interview with a professor from our English department, Professor William Prystauk, we talked about student literacy and his images on why students sometimes will, just don't like to read. And it was a very informative, and the show will be broadcast on our podcast on YouTube by the end of the day. And if you missed it, please do listen to it. It's very informative. But now we're heading on to our next guest. Recently, it's on the similar issue. There was an article published in the Wall Street Journal that my father sent to me one day. It was a few months ago. And it's a really gripping headline. It's called "We Pretend to Teach, They Pretend to Learn," and that just drew me in. And it was a very informative piece. It was tight, hit the nail right on the head, and it was short and to the point. And actually, I have the privilege of getting to speak to the author of that article, psychology professor down at South Carolina State University, Dr. Geoffrey Collier. Dr. Collier, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Dr. Collier. I want to thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Oh, you're quite welcome. The pleasure's mine.
Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule. Now, we'll indulge in the piece right now. It's a very informative. It's it was in the opinion section, yet it seemed like fact to me because of how I've noticed this similar trend myself. What inspired you to write the article?
Well, it was based on observations I had for quite some time. And I've been doing both research on my own students and doing as much reading as possible with people writing things, many of which were quite similar to what I was saying. And so really it was an attempt to try to see if I could take the issues as I saw them, put them as trenchantly and to the point as I possibly could in as few words as possible.
And that's, as you said, it's very tight and, it was to the point. And it's about, just to inform our viewers, the subhead right now, it gives a kind of an idea of what it's about. The subhead is, "At colleges today, all parties are strongly incentivized to maintain low standards." And he talks about how the, education system has been in a real rough state as of now. And he's listed some book titles that I'm sure you've read about these called, Bad Students, Not Bad Schools, and, quote, The 5-Year Party. When did you first notice this trend unfolding of student behavior?
Oh, it's been there as long as I've been teaching. I think that to an extent, schools have always functioned in a variety of ways. So there are certain elements here that are not particularly new. Credentialism is not particularly new. The schools, especially residential schools, have long been in the business of doing things besides educating. There's always been a social aspect to them. There are certain elements that have always been there. But what I think the trend that's most concerning, or the trends that are most concerning that have developed over, I would say, the last 50 years to one extent or other are, number one, the increased notion of school as a credentializing instrument. One pundit said it's basically a licensure for adulthood. So what we've gotten into is a situation where young people are told that essentially they need a college degree, and it is a licensure for adulthood, and they feel without it they're basically not an adult. The other aspect that's been unfolding for quite some time that has been documented is that students are studying less and less, and that's just more quantitative aspect of the problem. So the problem has multiple dimensions, but I'm just focusing on sort of the most salient ones.
Right.
And they've been developing over quite a period of time.
I'm sure they have. And like you said, you put it in a very clever way of it. Education, I'm just reading a verbatim from it, education thus has degenerated into a game of trap the rat, whereby the student and instructor view each other as adversaries. And I've seen that before. I see people talk about their professors and view them as their enemy, when in reality they're the one they're an asset. Why do you feel that students view some students view their professors as a foe instead of a resource?
Well, I think it basically boils down to grades. If there were no grades, then we wouldn't have this problem. But that coupled with the what I call the mini-max strategy, which is that sort of goes along with credentialism, that is minimize the effort, maximize the grade. So credentialism and the acquisition of knowledge are really not the same thing. And if you start to believe that the goal is the piece of paper, and the piece of paper is going to be some magical thing that's going to get you a job, then you start focusing on the credentials and the minimum labor required to obtain that credential. And then the professor becomes a Oh, because you've got the professor wants you to work hard. You don't want to work hard. And so the question is, how can you trick the professor to get the maximum out of the professor with the minimum amount of labor on your part? And then this puts the professor in the position of being a playing trap the rat. And some professors seem to love this role, and a lot of us don't love this role because we come into this profession thinking we're out there to help people, not hurt them.
Right. And so do you feel that, another question I had, that the education system, you also mentioned how it's becoming more into a consumer product. Do you feel it's, education shifted almost into a business to take money from other people instead of as a service to our young adults?
Absolutely. And this problem, too, has a number of dimensions. First of all, you have the growth of private for-profit schools, and there's been a lot of controversy lately about them. And at the same time, all schools, the cost of higher education, as we all know, has gone up and up and up much faster than inflation has. And the reasons for this are hotly debated. But we know that this is true even in the state schools. State schools are obviously a lot less expensive than the private schools, but they still are getting out of reach of some students. And so to the extent that you're paying for something, it automatically becomes a consumer product. And what grows out of that is a sense of entitlement. So I'm paying for the diploma, and asking me to work for the diploma also is asking me essentially to pay twice. I paid once in hard cold cash, and now I've got to pay again by working, and that's asking too much. So you've got that. The high price of education engenders a certain amount of consumerism automatically, and there are various reasons for that. But one of the problems, certainly from the point of view of the public schools, is that the states have reduced the amount of money that they're spending on higher education because of all the pressure to lower taxation. So what happened is during the Great Recession, or after the subsequent to the Great Recession, all states but one reduced their funding to higher education. I think North Dakota or South Dakota is the exception.
Is that so?
And by varying degrees, and most or all of them have not increased it back to prior levels. And I know my particular state, South Carolina, was the number 3 state in terms of percentage reduction. So we're down 43%. That has never been put back into the system. We have to raise our tuition because we can't pay the bills without raising the tuition. And so it becomes expensive, particularly when you're servicing a student population that isn't particularly wealthy, so that paying even state university tuition becomes a difficult proposition for them. And so naturally they're going to start to see it as a consumer good because they're paying for it. Now, there are other factors that go into this as well. There's a general increase in consumerism in society. So it's been documented that the importance of making money has increased over time with young people. This is a statistical fact because various study centers have asked young people, why do you go to college? And there are various reasons people go to college: to gain knowledge, to make more money, and so forth. But the importance of making money has increased over the years, and of course, part of this is because they're paying more money to get the degree, and then part of this is changes in attitudes in society about the value of money, which does tie into consumerism. Because the more value systems are defined by consumerism, more that value system is going to infect every aspect of life. And of course, some people don't believe that consumerist or free market approaches are the approach to everything. Now, I personally am generally a pro-free market person, but I also don't believe that it's a solution to all of life's problems. So that if you turn everything into consumer goods, then you run into problems. The obvious example is relationships. Relationships are, in some sense, talking about romantic relationships here. Romantic relationships obviously have an economic prospect to them that we evaluate our partner in terms of their value. And there's probably more of that going on than people readily admit, especially young people. But to reduce all relationships to simply an economic or consumer good obviously is not the kind of thing that most people would want to do. I mean, that's the kind of perspective Donald Trump might take, but many of us would not share that perspective. And analogously, in education, to the extent that it's viewed as a consumer good, tends to fall in line with the idea of credentialism, which is it's the piece of paper that counts and not the education that goes behind it. Also, reinforcing that is the fact that young people are told over and over and over again, if you get a college degree, you'll earn an extra $1 million over a lifetime, or whatever the number is.
Right.
And so they're told this over and over again. They all know this, and sort of reinforces the importance of this factor when going to college.
Right.
So these are all factors that play in, I believe.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you completely on that. You know, it's the market, it almost becomes very saturated because of how everyone says, oh, you know, if you get this, it automatically qualifies you for being successful, and it doesn't matter how you get it. And that sometimes leads to, it becomes a business, and, you know, it leads to decreases or increases in tuition sometimes, especially for state schools. I mean, I don't know if you've heard in Pennsylvania, our Governor Corbett has cut funding on a ton on our on state schools, and as this being a state school, tuition is increased, and, you know, it's more and more students have had trouble with that. And now on to another point. You talked about diplomas. You said you mentioned students receive, quote, Wizard of Oz diplomas. What did you mean by that? I'm just curious.
Oh, well, that's an important point, and it does relate to what I was just saying, and the whole notion of credentialism, because I also call it the magic piece of paper. As we all remember from The Wizard of Oz, the wizard was giving a diploma to signify knowledge, but it was just a diploma, and the idea that the diploma was sufficient. And the problem that runs into this is that when you have a lot of students who are not studying very hard and are graduating anyway, sometimes after 4 years, sometimes after 5 or 6 years, they don't know very much. They have not acquired a lot of fundamental skills, and when they get into the marketplace, they expect that diploma to entitle them to all kinds of things, a good job and better income and so forth. But a lot of employers are discovering that these pieces of paper aren't worth that much because the young graduates come in lacking a lot of skills in a lot of domains, not just technical. Of course, you have technical skills, so they can't write very well, they can't read very well, they're not learning to write terribly well, and a lot of other things. But a lot of times their soft skills are lacking as well. The soft skills being their interpersonal skills, how to handle a job, how to get with groups, and so forth. And so the diploma becomes a Wizard of Oz diploma. It's really worthless. And we have here a problem that sometimes in statistics called the tyranny of the average. So on average, it is perfectly true that the average college graduate makes a lot more money than people who don't graduate from college over the period of a lifetime. But people aren't averages. People are individuals. And as they say, your mileage may vary. So as a lot of people have noted, it depends a lot on what you major in and where you go to school, how prestigious the school is, and a whole lot of, whether you had internships and a whole lot of other factors that these averages sort of hide. Finally, I suspect that the value of a diploma so far it hasn't had any sign of decreasing, but it may start to decrease or at least plateau out as the body politic and the employers start to become very skeptical of employers, of diplomas rather. But the problem is diploma has its value now because it's the only game in town. There are no other alternative forms of credentializing. And finally, there is something called signaling theory, which becomes very important here. Signaling theory is the theory in economics. It's also called filtering theory, screening theory. It's the theory that what a degree does is basically filter out people who lack basic skills. But these are the skills that they bring to college, not that college adds. So, for example, some people are smarter than other people. Some people are more tenacious than other people. Some people have more social skills than other people. And these are differences that they bring to the college. And so schools can effectively hide behind this, and the people that drop out or can't make it through or come through but with a poor GPA are the folks lacking these basic prerequisites, and colleges are merely acting as a filter. And as economists have pointed out, they're a very expensive filter, right? There would be a lot easier way to separate the chaff from the wheat going through college. So in sum, the diploma is the sheepskin or diploma is often has less standing behind it than it pretends to represent.
Right. You just you just answered another question of mine about, if you believe that the value of a college education is decreasing, and that makes perfect sense. And since you wrote the article and you brought up the issue, do you see any feasible solutions to this issue in the near future?
Oh, it's not going to be easy, because it's just the problems are systemic, and they have to do with the incentive systems that are in place, so that there are solutions, but they're not easy ones, and there are solutions that are not going to work. So, for example, one symptom of all this is grade inflation. And the reason we have grade inflation is actually quite simple, is that the students want high grades, they whine when they don't get high grades, and high grades cost the professor nothing, okay? So when you have a good that's valued by one party and costs nothing for the other party to give, you're going to get a surfeit or excess of that good. This is just basic economics 101.
Right.
And so naturally we have grade inflation. Another reason we have grade inflation, I should point out, is that the whole system has a statistically nonsensical thing built into it, which is seed is, in the old days, seed was considered an average grade. But a lot of institutions, C is also the minimum grade, so you have to maintain a 2.0 average. Well, statistically, it's very difficult to have the minimum average be the same number, because naturally the grade's going to inflate. Okay, so how do we resolve grade inflation? Well, schools have been trying to resolve it by enforced grade distributions. A few schools have been doing this, and of course the professors are going to grouse and complain about this. So you could enforce certain grade distributions, and that might help a little bit. It doesn't get at the underlying problems, but it's one thing you might do. Certainly, I would like to see college education get cheaper, because the more expensive it is, as I mentioned before, the more it becomes a consumer good. So if the states could be pressured into funding state education, at least at the level they used to, and tuition reduced accordingly, then that would take some of the pressure off. Because again, if the students feel they're paying so much for it, they feel that they should be entitled to that diploma almost no matter what. So that's another possible approach to it. Now, two other things that come into the mix here are there's sort of two different solutions or approaches to this that are floating about that are kind of diametrically opposed, but they can possibly be integrated. So one of them is the technological approach. So a lot of people are pushing technology. So smart classrooms, all the way to 12 to post-secondary, MOOCs, nationally online courses, or just regular online courses, and more directly, intelligent tutoring based on artificial intelligence. So in other words, students aren't reading, for example. That's a known fact. Many students don't read the textbook. If they do read the textbook, they'll read it once, they'll skim it, and so on. They don't read it multiple times as they should. Now, you can enforce all that by putting it online and building questions and tasks into the system, and you can get more and more clever with this using artificial intelligence. And this is exactly what the textbook publishers are doing now. So this is a technological-based solution, basically, and it also would reduce the price of the whole process. You can make this thing basically self-sustaining, and so that the professor, you don't even need the professor anymore to an extent, and so that the professor, in fact, the professors can be just videotaped, and my claim is that any professor that does not interact with students is basically manufacturing his own obsolescence or her own obsolescence, or at least the obsolescence of the field. Because if you don't interact with students, then you can and will be replaced with a videotape of yourself very inexpensively, or even worse, a videotape of a superstar professor, as happens with these MOOC courses. And so you get a combination of videotape and online tutoring, and you could cheapen the whole process and also have some more kind of quality control. So people who are in love with technology like this kind of approach, and there are things to be said about this approach. Now, the alternative approach, which goes in the opposite direction, is to go back to the old model of the professor as more involved with the students. It's called in loco parentis, in the place of the parents. And up to the 60s, colleges and universities were considered to take the place of the parents. And then because of the rebellion of the 60s, a lot of colleges dropped that role. Professors were happy to drop that role because they didn't want to be involved in that. A lot were more interested in doing their research. And so the whole notion of in loco parentis and mentoring and all that stuff has disappeared from a lot of schools, especially the bigger state universities. A lot of that survives at some of those smaller private schools, but of course you pay for that level of attention. And so this is the opposite approach of the technology approach, where the professor is more deeply involved with the lives of the students and treats the whole students. And there have been books written about this. I think Mark Taylor's book is made at least partially about this. Now, you can integrate the two, and I think the notion of the flipped classroom, which is another popular notion, moves towards integrating the two. So the flipped classroom, you use the technology, and then the professor augments the technology. Although these two approaches seem mutually exclusive, in fact they're not. And to the extent that the technology can free the professor to be more individualized, then the two approaches actually can be mutually supportive. So I think that summarizes the current scene.
For sure, yeah. I've actually read about some schools. One school I've read about has a library that's now completely digital and has all their books are digital, which means less struggles for the the textbooks and the professor in that sense. Okay, well, we only have a little time left. We just have one or two more questions I'd like to ask you. You mentioned how the higher education system has become credentials, and I believe that. I've read about how we're in a credential society and all that. It's about what you have. How do you believe the system has digressed towards this? Do you think it has to correlate with how more students are matriculating at colleges than ever before?
Yeah, that's absolutely part of it. It's a complicated story, I think. As I mentioned before, to an extent, schools were always about credentialing. I mean, if you go back 400-600 years, universities were basically giving you a licensure to be a priest. It was basically training for a priest. So you learned Latin, you learned what we call the quadrivium and the trivium, which included rhetoric and various other things, and that was your credential to be a priest. So we shouldn't be naive about this and think that schools were never about credentialing. It's always been about credentialing to an extent, and it always will be, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just think that the pendulum may have swung too far in that direction. And part of the as I mentioned, I think there are various components of this. Part of the problem is that students are studying less and are less involved with education. And when you see the process being all about the credential, obviously the education falls by the wayside. And of course, many students believe that what they're learning is irrelevant to their lives and even irrelevant to their careers. Because a lot of students, particularly first-generation students, don't understand that college is about more than vocational school. And so you have a number of majors that are essentially vocational, such as nursing, teaching, some aspects of business, and some others, audiology, speech pathology. So there are a number of majors that are specifically vocational. But traditionally, college was not vocational. It was not aligned with particular professions. You didn't major in this to get a particular profession or major in that to get a particular profession. And a lot of young students don't understand that. So they come in vocationally oriented, particularly first-generation college students, don't understand this, so that they are, and they've been poorly advised. First of all, because high school advisors are overburdened, and their parents don't understand this either because they never went to college. And so they look at it vocationally, and if they look at it vocationally, then the parts of it that are part of general education and not part of the vocational component seem to them irrelevant, and in their dream world they wouldn't have to take all these parts. So it becomes very credentialed.
Right, I agree with you completely. Okay, well, that's about all the time we have. Thank you very much. Very informative. And this was Dr. Geoffrey Collier, a psychology professor at South Carolina State University, for coming on the show to speak about an article he published in the Wall Street Journal titled, "We Pretend to Teach, They Pretend to Learn." I recommend everyone read it. Thank you very much, Dr. Collier.
Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate it. And stay tuned for more KU Live.
Kutztown University's Department of Information Technology recently launched MyKU Mobile, which can be accessed at mykumobile.kutztown.edu. MyKU Mobile provides a quick way for students to view grades, financial aid information, announcements, and schedules, all from your phone. The new site also integrates with social networking sites, enabling students to post their schedules on Twitter and Facebook without ever having to use a computer. Make sure to visit myku.kutztown.edu for the best way to view MyKU on your phone.
KUR, the radio voice of Kutztown University. KUR Kutztown. Hey everyone, welcome back to KU Live. We just had a really informative interview with Dr. Geoffrey Collier, a psychology professor at South Carolina State University, about an article he published in the Wall Street Journal called "We Pretend to Teach, They Pretend to Learn." It's a great piece, and I highly recommend you read it. But now we're moving on to our next guest. Big Bad VooDoo Daddy, a jazz band from California area, is coming to play in Kutztown University on Wednesday the 17th, so I believe that's tomorrow. And we actually have a member of the group, Mr. Glenn Marhefka. First off, thank you very much for coming on the show, Glenn.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We really appreciate you coming in. So now you're a member of Big Bad VooDoo Daddy. Just so for our viewers to know, for those who don't know, how was the band started?
The band was started actually over 20 years ago now, and it was started with our singer Scotty Morris and our drummer Kurt Sodergren. And they started playing, they wanted to play jazz and swing music, and this was back in the early 90s. And they decided to try to form a band of guys that really loved that style of music and wanted to play it. And they assembled it, and it took a few years to sort of get a horn section together, and we started playing all over, the Southern California area and working our way up the coast, and here we are over 20 years later.
Right, yeah, it's a really great career you've had. You've actually gotten to play at the Super Bowl, if I'm not correct.
We did. We played the Super Bowl halftime. I think it was in 2000, and we played it with Stevie Wonder and Gloria Estefan. It was really great.
It's an amazing halftime performance. That's great. What's the part? And you've been staying together for a long time. How have you guys been able to stick together after all these years?
I think really it's just a matter of everybody has a lot of respect for each other, and the band really works really hard, and everybody's getting better at their craft all the time, and I think it's. We've assembled a group of guys that really love playing this style of music, and we've just been lucky to sort of keep it together for this long. I mean, most bands don't really stay together much longer than a few years at most, and here we are in 2 decades in, so it's pretty great.
It's truly amazing, and as you said, you're playing here at KU on Wednesday the 17th, which I believe is tomorrow. And have you ever played on college campuses before?
Yeah, we've played on college campuses all over the United States many, many times over the years, yeah.
Sure, and have you noticed any difference? The students, the same number of people come to see your show, or do you feel that college students don't enjoy jazz as much?
I think it's a good mixture. When we play on the campuses, you have a mixture of alumni, current students, and community members, so it's always different. I think when we first started playing college campuses, maybe 15, 20 years ago, it was more of a rock show, maybe, where it was like standing room and it was kind of crazy. And we now when we play college campuses, we usually play the performing arts centers, and it's a real nice theater, and it's a sort of a eclectic crowd, from amongst all of those different groups.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm going to certainly try and make an attempt to make it there myself. And I just forgot to ask you about this. Big VooDoo Daddy, or Big Bad VooDoo Daddy, excuse me. That's quite the name. Where did the name come from?
The name actually came from our singer, Scotty Morris. He went to an Albert Collins concert. He's a great blues guitarist. And he met Albert after the concert, and he asked him to sign a poster, and Albert actually wrote, "To the Big Bad VooDoo Daddy" from Albert Collins. And so when Scotty, our singer, and our drummer, Kurt Sodergren, were starting the group, Scotty said to Kurt, "Hey, what do you think about calling this group this name, Big Bad VooDoo Daddy? I had it written on this poster I have." And Kurt was like, "That's a great name. That's really cool." And they started calling it that. And it was kind of interesting back, when we first started, because this was the early '90s, and when you said the name Big Bad VooDoo Daddy to a club owner or a promoter to try and get the band to play, they or anybody even saw that name, like, people didn't know what it was. A lot of people thought we were maybe a rap act at that point, or hip hop music, and they just didn't know what it was. So it was kind of interesting to have such a unique name.
Right. It is a little eccentric for a jazz name, but I don't think it matters. I think it's very unique, and that's a great thing. It's how you stand out, and standing out is something that you have to do to make it in the music industry. And one thing you have to do is you develop a following. How are you able to build your following and become what you are today?
Well, we started out playing small clubs, and the way to build a following back then was just to play, have people come out and, do a great job, and then they tell their friends, and you bring people the next time. And we developed a big following in Southern California, from basically Santa Barbara to San Diego, by just playing relentlessly over and over and just winning the crowds over. And this was, when we started, it was before there was internet, there was no social media, none of that. So we just sort of played, we marketed ourselves, we had mailing lists, we did everything we possibly could. And then, as we progressed, we were really fortunate. In the late '90s, we had a friend of ours who had come to a lot of shows all the time, John Favreau, who's now a pretty well-known director. He did movie Iron Man, all the Iron Man movies, and Elf and all that stuff. And he used to hang with us and come to all our shows. And he shot this movie Swingers. He wrote the movie Swingers, and he had us be in it as ourselves. So at that point, once we did that movie and it came out, it was a very big. At the time, it was a very big sort of underground movie, cult classic amongst the college age crowd, and instantly we could go to any city, and we were the band that was in the movie Swingers. So it sort of snowballed for us, after about 4 years of doing all these clubs and doing it a certain way of building up a fan base that way. All of a sudden, we were a well-known act from this movie. And then we just capitalized on that, and then we put out a major label album in 1998 that sold about 2 million albums, and it just kind of worked that way. And next thing you know, we were playing the Super Bowl halftime show and being on the Tonight Show and all those kind of things.
That's amazing. You got to start from somewhere. But I have to ask, those are a lot of great moments. What do you believe was as a group? What do you believe was your celebrity tipping point? I don't really say, I wouldn't really say there's a celebrity tipping point for me. The biggest moment I think that I knew that something had changed was right after the movie Swingers came out. We were playing this place in LA here called the Derby. It was kind of like a pretty well-known club back then, and that's where the movie Swingers was shot. And I remember coming to, we played every Wednesday night for about 2.5 years there. And I remember coming there the following Wednesday after the movie Swingers had come out in the theaters. And I got there early, about, maybe 5 o'clock, to kind of set up. And I'd usually set up and eat dinner, and then we'd play. We wouldn't play till 10. And at 5 o'clock when I showed up, there was a line all the way up the street and around the corner to see us. And granted, we weren't going on until 10 o'clock at night. So once that happened, I was like, oh, this movie's a game changer for sure. So I think that was probably one of the biggest moments for our career. For sure. And like you said, hey, the California area, that is a big market, and that's a great place to start. And I'm sure that helped a lot. And I think forgive me, I may have mentioned this before, but I just want to clarify. Just so our viewers could know, how did you all meet?
Well, we were all just sort of friends of friends. Scotty Morris, our singer, and our drummer, Kurt Sodergren, started the group. And then they added our bass player. They knew Dirk. They added him. And then I think Scotty knew Andy, our sax player. And then added him to the group, and it just kind of worked that way. And then, I got a call from one of the guys because I had played in some groups with them, and we actually just sort of hand selected each guy as the band grew. So that was pretty much how we sort of formed. So that's part of the testament as to why we're probably still together as well, is that each guy was sort of picked because he was the right guy for the spot that we needed filled.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. You got to get the right people in there. It can't always just be your friends. Sometimes that works out for some people, but most of the time it's getting the right person in the right position. Well, that's great. And
right.
Your last album was, I believe, 2 years ago. And what projects are you working on right now?
Well, we actually put out our Christmas album last Christmas as well, but we did an album called Rattle Them Bones 2 years ago. So right now what we're doing is we're out touring and kind of doing stuff from all of our albums, and we're going to do another Christmas tour starting right after Thanksgiving all the way through the end of the year to promote the album we just put out. And then we're starting to work on some new songs, so we're going to start working towards getting a new album's worth of material together in the next year or so.
Well, that's great to know. It's insider information right there. A new album in potentially a year or so. And you've published numerous albums before. What was your favorite album that you've published?
I think I don't know if I really have a favorite per se. I know that the album we did, Rattle Them Bones, recently was a great album. I think it sounds good. It's probably one of our best sounding albums for sure. But I think I really like our album called Save My Soul. It's like a sort of a dedication to New Orleans music, that the styles and sounds that we've heard in our travels to New Orleans. And I think that's a great album. That was actually a really fun one to record for some reason. And but they're all pretty great.
I'm sure they are. And do you have a favorite town or city that you've played in?
I always love going to New Orleans. Speaking of New Orleans, I mean, that's a great city. There's so many great places that we go. I probably can't really name one, but there's I would say that's probably one of my favorite cities.
That's great. And have you ever been around you're playing, as we know, you're playing at KU tomorrow night. Do you feel, have you ever been around this area, the Lehigh Valley area before?
We have. We've been through the area. We've played a bunch, throughout that whole region. So we love it up there. It's really beautiful and nice.
That's great. Well, we can't wait to have you here. And that was Glenn Marhevka of Big Bad VooDoo Daddy, a jazz band that we'll be playing tomorrow night at Schaefer Auditorium at 7:30 p.m. Thank you very much for coming in, Fred.
Great. Thanks a lot.
KUR, the radio voice of Kutztown University. KUR Kutztown. Hey everyone, welcome back to KU Live. The time right now is about 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We're just going to wrap things up. We had a very packed show today, one of our best in a while. We had Professor William Prystauk of the English department here to speak about a few pieces he wrote for KU Converge, a professor journal. We had Dr. Geoffrey Collier, a psychology professor at South Carolina State University, who was there to speak about an article he published in the Wall Street Journal entitled "We Pretend to Teach, They Pretend to Learn." And then our final guest was Glenn Marhevka of Big Bad VooDoo Daddy, on a more lighter note, a jazz band that will be performing tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. in Schaefer Auditorium, and they are a jazz band. And actually, just to end the show, I've just been informed by my producer that we are handing out 2 pairs of tickets to the first 2 people that call in, and the number for that is 610-683-4859. That's 610-683-4859. Come on, call in, first come, first serve, and we have 2 pairs of tickets to give out to people, and you can come claim them in the station. So as soon as you can, if you hear this, pick up your phone and come dialing, because someone else will. All right, well, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for listening in to everyone. If you've missed the show, all of our broadcasts will be posted on the website of the KUR and our podcast. And thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
It's the top of the hour, and you're listening to the radio voice of Kutztown University.